You're listening to the National Secular Society podcast, hosted by Emma Park. Today I'm going to be talking to Maddy Bridgman and Sam Fitzsimmons, two representatives from the Integrated Education Fund. This is a charity in Northern Ireland that promotes a school system which is not divided by denomination into Catholic and Protestant schools, but instead is inclusive, welcoming all religious and cultural backgrounds. I'll be discussing the particular problems which Northern Ireland is facing in reforming its education system and why it matters. I'm joined now by Maddy Bridgman and Sam Fitzsimmons of the Integrated Education Fund in Northern Ireland. Maddy and Sam, could you perhaps start by taking us through a bit of the background? What's the current situation with religious divisions in Northern Ireland, just to remind us all of where we've got to, and how is it affecting education in particular?
Okay. The education system in Northern Ireland is fairly complex, both in a religiously segregated way and also in a socio-economic segregation. When the state was founded in 1921, the then education minister wanted to establish a single non-denominational education system. That was opposed by the main churches within Northern Ireland. And in 1922, the idea of a single system was dropped in favour of secular or segregated education, with the Catholic churches taking responsibility for the teaching of Catholic children and the Protestant churches taking responsibility for the education of Protestant children. That has existed without change for coming on 100 years now. The integrated education movement was established by parents in 1975 when they decided that they wanted a school model that would educate children of both traditions and of others. It has been parents who have been driving this campaign, and today the IEF supports parents and schools who want integrated provision in their area. Figures there are that 90% of our schools are pretty much either one tradition of another, with just under 8% of children going to integrated schools.
So just under 8% of children at integrated schools at the moment. And so when was the Integrated Education Fund founded? Was that immediately in 1975 or was that a bit later?
No, that came much later. That came in 1992. As a result of parents literally having to financially fund the establishment of integrated schools, a number of foundations felt that it was important to provide them with a financial foundation that would take away the responsibility of having to raise the finances to establish the school. So that's why the Integrated Education Fund was established.
And do you receive government funding or any outside funding?
No, we're absolutely a charity reliant on donations. I mean, just to fill a little bit more of the background there, when integrated schools were first set up from scratch, they had to prove their viability and then eventually the government would step in and fund them. So, I mean, integrated schools are not private schools or anything in that sense. But there was this gap of a year or two of having to prove that there's demand in the area and that the school was functioning well and meeting all the requirements of being a government-funded school. And that was where parents, I mean, some of them remortgaged houses and took out huge loans and things like that, just to see that their children could be in schools that met their desire for cross-community education.
Sure. So what exactly is the purpose of an integrated school? Is it the desire to sort of have a sort of common religious teaching for different children of different faiths, or how exactly does it work?
Well, I think a lot of people see it as that very basic Catholics and Protestants together in the classroom, and that was the initial impetus, if you like. But it's more than just simply mixing two people who go to different churches or two groups of people who go to different churches. It's a lot more about an ethos and an environment of respect, and somewhere you can explore different views and different histories and cultures. And certainly in the sort of best practice, it would include a range of sports, music, literature and perspectives of all sorts. And Northern Ireland is changing as well a lot in terms of demographics. It was presumably, well, obviously, really, because of the history of the Troubles, there wasn't a great migration into Northern Ireland for several decades. But the culture is becoming much more diverse. So it's much more than just bringing Catholic and Protestant children together. The integrated schools are ideally placed to welcome people from all backgrounds and traditions and all faiths and none.
So what sort of percentage of children today would you say are neither Catholic nor Protestant in Northern Ireland?
Well, census figures would show that section is growing. Nearly a third of people would actually not want to identify themselves with one culture or another. However much they might see their background privately, is very much, I think, a movement now of people saying, we actually don't want to declare for one side or another. We're Northern Irish. We want to get on with being together. And I think integrated schools are certainly not about airbrushing out people's culture and background, but I think there is a section of the population who is saying, can we deal with the here and now rather than, the history or the church my parents went to or something like that.
So people want to move on.
That would be the indication from successive opinion polls.
Right.
Over the last 20 years, there has been an annual attitudinal survey carried out by independent polling companies. And they consistently say that 70 to 80% of the population would support their school becoming integrated. Now, the challenge there for parents is because government doesn't plan for integrated provision, it is left to parents to build or transform their school into an integrated school. And that's a challenge for parents because it really takes political will and political leadership to deliver on the aspirations of those parents who would like to see integrated provision in their area. The IEF are working tirelessly to present the voices of young people and communities and parents to government in a number of ways to get schools transformed. But we still very much are dependent on political leadership.
So it's a bit of an uphill struggle for you at the moment.
It is, yes, because there is an argument there that it serves vested interests well to maintain the status quo of separate education. Now, there are a number of vested interests involved in this. We have one of the most complex administrative systems in the delivery of education that there could possibly be. We have a planning authority for what is de facto Protestant schools, a planning authority for Catholic maintained schools, and we have 9 separate sectoral support bodies supporting various models of schools. There clearly is an understanding and an acknowledgement by politicians that we need a more effective and efficient education system. But it has taken quite a bit of time for them to reach that conclusion.
How does the law support the status quo, and is segregated education favoured by the legal system as it stands at the moment, or the laws currently in place?
It's much more a case of the embedded structures within our system. When our education system was established in 1921-22, we built in segregation into the institutions, and we haven't changed those institutions, or for that matter, the way we deliver education in the last 100 years.
It's more, it's policy rather than law. In fact, there is a statutory duty for the Department of Education to encourage and facilitate the development of integrated education, but it's really having the policy structures and the ministers in place to actually promote that and make sure that is being done.
And just to add to what Maddy said, the statutory duty has been in place from 1989, and in 2014, an integrated school had to take a High Court case because the Department of Education wouldn't let it expand its numbers, so it was failing to encourage and facilitate integrated education. The department failed in challenging that court ruling, and I guess we are seeing some change in how the Department of Education is delivering on integrated education, but there is such a long way to go in terms of, as Maddy pointed out, putting in policies that will make that happen.
Is there a worry that having more integrated education and less segregated education will be politically difficult or will stir up troubles among people of different religious backgrounds in Northern Ireland?
I wouldn't necessarily go as far as to say that people fear it will stir up trouble, but I think, yes, there are certainly political parties who look at who they perceive would be their supporters and start saying, oh, well, we'll be seen to be kind of in some way urging them to abandon their loyalties and their backgrounds, which, as I've said, if you were visiting an integrated school and saw what happened in the classroom, that is absolutely not what it's about. But I think certainly for political parties, some of them see it as problematic.
Maddy, actually, on that point, let's talk a bit more about what actually happens in integrated schools. How is religion taught in integrated schools, and how does that differ from the way it's taught in segregated schools?
Well, there is a statutory curriculum in Northern Ireland, just as there is elsewhere in the UK, that is actually drawn up by the four main churches, Protestant and Catholic, but Christian. And so all schools, whether they're Irish medium, Protestant grammar, Catholic or integrated, have to follow that curriculum with certain options within it. The integrated primary schools would follow standard, again, Christian Bible-based RE syllabus, but they would also offer faith formation classes to children of the Catholic faith who wish to avail of that. And post-primary, again, there is, it's leading towards usually public exams. So again, there would be that standard curriculum. But what I would find in integrated schools is that they are open to discussion of different perspectives on that.
And in segregated schools, is that not the case?
I've been a governor of an integrated school, not a...
Perhaps maybe the difference between a school, which is predominantly one tradition or community, and the other, and integrated schools, is that within a single tradition school, there is only one narrative being heard. And that narrative is dictated by the ethos of the school. In integrated schools, there are various narratives taking place, not just in the classroom, but also in staff rooms and in playing grounds, where children and young people are learning about each other, learning about their differences, and also celebrating their differences. That just doesn't happen within a single tradition school.
How do children find these different schools? Have you had feedback from children on their parents as to the advantages of going to an integrated school? Does it have a long-term benefit to them in terms of integrating with children from different backgrounds?
It's an interesting question, Anna, because there is the beginnings of some academic research over this last couple of years, which are showing evidence that children who go to integrated schools are much more confident in their own culture and traditions, and much more confident in being able to engage with others of a different background. One study by Professor Stringer at University of Ulster, he carried a 10-year longitudinal study which looked at children who went to a controlled school, which is a de facto Protestant school, a maintained school, and an integrated school. And the conclusions from that 10-year study was that children who went to an integrated school were much better prepared for the outside world, and in particular for the growing globalization of industry and commerce.
I think as well, what we're seeing slightly more anecdotal level is that there is an organisation of alumni of past pupils of integrated schools, and they're very vocal in saying how they felt that type of education has benefited them as they've gone out into the world. One thing several of them have said is they didn't really realise it was just where they went to school, and it was only actually when they moved on and met other people from other schools and other backgrounds that they realised they were very, very fortunate to be in this, unfortunately still a minority of people, but who have access to that interaction and that sort of broad-minded exploration of a variety of perspectives.
Sure. And what about parents? Are you getting any anecdotal feedback from them?
I think, again, yes, parents who probably went through the system several years ago and are now often said, well, I didn't even know much about integrated education, but I was determined my children weren't going to go to the same sort of school I did. Maybe I didn't meet somebody from a different denomination until I left school at 18. And so that's a growing movement as well.
And what about the recruitment of teachers? How does that differ in a segregated from an integrated school?
Well, all schools in Northern Ireland, there is equality legislation in Northern Ireland governing employment and services and all sorts of aspects. That doesn't apply to schools in any sense. There's also fair employment legislation, particularly targeting, originally to target discrimination on religious grounds. Obviously, it also would cover race and sexuality and gender and things. Teachers are exempt from that, and that would cover, again, all schools in Northern Ireland.
And that's both at primary and secondary level?
Yes, yes. Now, in integrated schools, they would strive to have a balanced representation on their staff and their board, and obviously in their pupils from all sections of the community.
Sure. So do you have to be a practicing Protestant or Catholic to attend a controlled or maintained school, respectively?
To attend or to
work there as a teacher?
Well, some of the research from Ulster University, who are carrying out a project looking at barriers to a more unified integrated system, has found that although it wasn't necessarily 100% awareness of this exception to employment, the reality is that people tend to stick within their own sort of cultural background when they're applying for jobs and also when they're recruiting other people, that it's still very much in the culture. Again, you do hear stories of people who have maybe a local priest or minister as a referee more likely to get a job than somebody who doesn't. That would be very anecdotal and possibly, you would hope, is certainly in the minority. But I think there is still very much a culture on governing bodies in the controlled and maintained schools that churches have a lot of influence in every aspect of the school.
Right. So would members of the respective church sit on the governing body, for example?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah.
Right. And
just to add to that, when we talk about the segregated nature of our education system, it is structural. We have, in controlled schools, we have representatives from the Protestant churches on the boards, and within Catholic schools we have clergy from the Catholic Church on school boards. And that really is to ensure that the various ethos are embedded within the system, or within the school, should I say.
Right. Do people, you said that about a third of people in Northern Ireland probably don't want to see themselves as being particularly identifying with one church or the other. What happens to them? Do they still have to nonetheless go to a Protestant or a Catholic school?
Well, certainly if there isn't an integrated school near them, then yes, they do. I think, again, Catholic Protestant is sort of an easy shorthand for people. It's not necessarily to do with what church you go to. It's a lot to do with how you see yourself culturally, British or Irish, and from generations of the culture in your family. But as I say, although there are lots of people saying we want to look beyond that, I think you would tend to then, if you didn't have the choice of an integrated school, say, well, where does my child going to feel more comfortable?
Right. So
which then it leaves you further segregated.
So they're being forced to go to a segregated school just because there's not really any alternative at the moment.
I suppose forced is perhaps the word that we would use.
Right.
What we would say is that they are left with no choice
Sure.
other than to go to a controlled or maintained school. because there is no planning for integrated education. It has been established by parents. There are 65 integrated schools. Therefore, the options and the choices aren't there for people. So they will fall back into where their community would send their children to the school, the nearest school.
Okay, you've got about 8% of schools integrated so far, you said. So what are you doing now to increase that number? How's it going in terms of your where the IEF is going at the moment?
Well, I think when we talked a bit about the history of the movement, we talked about schools being started from scratch, but there is another way that parents can access integrated education. Again, it's not a simple overnight process, but you can go through, there's a process called transformation, where a school from a different sector, a different model of governance and management becomes an integrated school. That can only happen with parental support. It has to have parental support, and parents have to vote on whether they want to take that step. Now, the Integrated Education Fund, with our sister organisation, which is a sort of arm's length government body for integrated schools, NICE, have been promoting a campaign for parents to register in confidence online their interest in bringing integration to their local school. And on the basis of that, then reaching out to schools in areas which have shown a lot of interest in integrated education, and talked to the governors, talked to principals and staff and parents about the possibility of taking this path. This year we've seen 6 successful ballots in primary and nursery schools where parents have said, yes, we want to start this process. Unfortunately, it could be a year and a half before that process sees any results. So obviously there will be some parents there that have moved on, but they want to see integrated education in their area. And I think that's a very strong message that's coming out from this campaign.
So in terms of increasing that, are you trying to raise awareness among parents at different schools for the importance of transforming a segregated school into an integrated school?
It's not really telling them the importance. It's more, as Sam has said, a series of surveys conducted by different organisations or different polling bodies has found overwhelming support for integrated education. And we're raising awareness of people that if you haven't got access locally to an integrated school, you can bring integration into the area, into an existing school, into your own school. Obviously, a priority for parents is a good school.
Sure.
Whether academically, pastorally, sports and cultural facilities, and ideally local and accessible to them. Mm-hmm. And, you totally endorse that, but that could become a better school by being an integrated school, offering all those aspects of a quality education to the whole community, and giving, if you like, the added value of a diverse classroom and that experience for young people. So the Integrate My School campaign, which is an online website, but with a lot of community engagement and outreach work, is not telling parents that this is important. It's telling them that what we see as the benefits, but also saying, if this is something you would like for your school, you can bring it. You can, along with other parents, start the push for this to happen.
And are you getting a positive response to the campaign so far?
Very good, yes.
Pretty much the 6 or 7 schools that have balloted this year alone have been generated through that IMS campaign, both sort of community outreach and some parental engagement. So, yeah, absolutely. I think the challenge that we have, we're a small charity, and we're being asked, or taking the role of what the Department of Education should be doing. And, obviously it's a case of we're an independent charity that has to raise the money to resource this campaign. What we would like to see is the Department of Education and the planning authorities, the Education Authority and the Catholic Council for Maintained Schools, doing this work rather than an independent charity.
And what's been the Department for Education's response so far? Why have they been dragging their heels?
As they say, their role is not to promote any particular sector. Their role is to encourage and facilitate. And I would sort of go back to, in 2014, how we had to take a High Court case against the Department of Education for failing to encourage and facilitate.
So in the future, are you challenging the Department for Education again? How are you trying to get them to change their mind?
That is an ongoing engagement with the Department of Education. Equally, we're also engaging at high levels with our local politicians to make them aware of the demand that there is out there for integrated education, and equally to make them aware of the economic and financial benefits of an education system. Because in essence, what we do is we have approximately 50,000 empty school desks out there. And, many of the schools, small schools, could be merged and become an integrated school. And it has the benefits of not just being economically advantageous, but also in terms of social cohesion and reconciliation. If our children are being taught side by side in the same classroom, it diminishes the need for the them and us narrative that we have currently in Northern Ireland.
And is that them and us narrative still sort of a real fact of life in Northern Ireland, even today?
It is in the political arena, as we're seeing in yet another election period.
Right.
It's not necessarily part of everyday life. You just look out of the window here and see the people going about their business. I don't think there is that sort of same them and us mentality. I'm sure there would be some elements of it, but I think they're very much the minority. But we have a slight problem in that I think politicians like to kind of revive that, because then they're marking out their own territory in terms of political party. The other issue we have here, of course, is the Assembly hasn't sat for several years, and yet we haven't got direct rule from Westminster, and education is a devolved matter. We don't have an education minister. So while we can work with the politicians to suggest what their policy should be and how it would be quite acceptable to the majority of their voters and would not threaten anybody and would actually be economic sense, etc., to actually start making structural changes, we need a minister in place.
So who is in fact in charge of education if there isn't a minister?
Well, civil servants are, but there's a limit to what powers they have. I said structural changes can't be. It's more sort of statutory changes. You need an assembly to vote on them, a minister to introduce them.
And are you the only charity dealing with this issue in Northern Ireland at the moment, or are there any others?
Yes, no, we are the charity for it.
The only one. Wow.
Yeah.
So where do you see this going in the future? How would you like to see your campaign developing? Obviously, get some more schools undergoing the transformation process, but where do you want to go next?
I guess there are two strands to what we're doing, and that is to support parents and schools who want to transform to integrated status. The other element of it is we need a fundamental root and branch review of how we deliver education in Northern Ireland. And we are working with the political parties to carry out, or at least put it in as a policy in the next programme for government, that they will carry out a root and branch review to address the issues, for example, the federal exception of teachers, the cost of division, the amount of settled support bodies we have in an overly bloated administrative system, the long tail of underachievement in our schools because money is going to maintaining institutions rather than where it's needed, and that is in the classroom. And that will be the two key aims for the Integrated Education Fund going forward.
Do you think that the religious division among the segregated education system has an effect on academic achievement in schools?
It's an interesting question because there is some work that has been carried out in relation to young Protestant boys underachieving. But that long tail of underachievement, I think, is a broader issue because not only do we have segregation in terms of religion, but we also have a grammar system, a selection system in Northern Ireland, which segregates children at the age of 11 and sends them to grammar schools and non-selective schools. So there's a whole host of elements which are feeding into the levels of underachievement in Northern Ireland. But certainly, whilst we maintain duplicating resources and therefore finances being split in maintaining a dual system, it's certainly the money's not going where it's needed.
Sure. So basically the idea is you have more smaller schools to preserve the segregation rather than having larger schools which could be integrated.
Yes, that's exactly right. Although I would say, point out, as the latest briefing paper from Ulster University shows, even merging some of these schools does not mean you're going to get a huge school. You would still have the advantage of a local kind of family feeling school in a rural area. So we're not suggesting so everything merges into big monster kind of exam factories or anything like that. There would still very much be schools where parents are involved. That's part of the integrated ethos as well, that parents have a lot of say in the governance and running of schools, and that can still meet local needs.
In the integrated ethos, which you've been talking a lot about, is there still a religious element? And if so, how does it fit in?
Well, there has to be a religious element because, as we've said, there is the statutory RE and the same as elsewhere in the UK, statutory worship. So, and we have to say as well, the first integrated school was set up by people with a sort of Christian impulse, saying we don't like this image that the troubles are about Catholics versus Protestants. We actually want to show that we can work together and that we do have a lot in common. I mean, that was the first school back in 1981. There are other schools, obviously, have come since then. And so, yes, there has to be a religious element in it that way.
Sure, but it's just not solely one denomination.
Absolutely, yes. No. I mean, that first integrated school, which is still going, they have two chaplains, Catholic and Protestant.
I see. And just very finally, my last question is really about how does education provision in Northern Ireland compare with elsewhere in Europe? Is there anywhere that has a similar issue? Are you looking to any other country as a model for what your education system should be like?
We would suggest that would be where an independent commission would look at what's best out there. I mean, we know there are systems like in Finland and other Scandinavian countries, which in terms of PISA results tend to do far better than Northern Ireland and the rest of Great Britain. But this very much is why we need a root and branch review of our education system, so as we can create a vision and an education system which is fit for the 21st century.
Sure. Are there any other countries in Europe, would you say, which have similar problems with segregated education, or is this very much specific to Northern
absolutely.
Ireland?
If you look at the Balkans, the likes of Bosnia, Herzegovina, and Cyprus, there are many countries in Europe which are in a post-conflict society and are looking at education for ways of reconciliation and bringing communities together. So there are a number of examples out there that are probably more segregated than they are in Northern Ireland, and there are some that are less segregated in Northern Ireland.
Sure, but maybe Scandinavia would be a potential model in the long term.
Perhaps, yes, but I think, we'd need sort of an outside view of that, or an independent view to look at the different possible models here and what would best suit Northern Ireland. And I think it might actually, again, be a Northern Ireland model.
Right. Something to suit your particular character of the way the country's developed.
Absolutely.
Yes. So Maddy Bridgman and Sam Fitzsimmons, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
That was episode 21 of the National Secular Society podcast, hosted by Emma Park. If you would like to help us challenge religious privilege and support freedom of and from religion in Britain today, why not become a member of the NSS? Full details are on our website at secularism.org.uk/podcast. If you like this podcast, you can find more episodes and more information about this episode on the website. Thanks for listening.